Working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Lesroy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for You.
A pleasant day to all listening to the sound of my voice. You are now tuned into another edition of Working for You. This week we will be speaking about the United Nations. That's the international body dedicated to maintaining peace and friendly relations throughout the entire world. This week, on Thursday, October 24th, the United Nations will be marking a very important observation, and here to speak to us about that observation is the Senior Foreign Service Officer within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Samuel Berridge. Mr. Berridge, welcome to Working for You. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me here today, Kiloni.
Okay, so can you tell us about this observation? It's United Nations Day. Why is this day being celebrated or observed annually?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon to shed some light on the work of the United Nations. Actually, particularly in light of the observance of United Nations Day on the 24th of October. Now, this is the day which commemorates the entry into force of the UN Charter. The UN Charter was signed all the way back in June of 1945. However, it was signed on the 24th of October in that same year. So the significance of this date is encapsulated in the observance of United Nations Day. Now, the day was first observed in 1948, as I indicated earlier, and the objective is to celebrate everything that the UN represents and all of the achievements that have been made since 1945. So it's a very important day because it allows us to focus on the work of the UN and the importance and the relevance to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis in particular.
Good. You just mentioned the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. I know some may wonder, man, this is an international body. Why is United Nations Day important for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis? What do we have to celebrate about the United Nations?
Well, we are a sovereign country, and I think with sovereignty comes dignity, comes pride, and it also enables us to engage with our developing country partners and all countries, all friendly countries. In fact, there are 193 countries in the United Nations. That's a lot of scope for engagement. 193 countries with which we can actually engage, and we can advance our development. You know, when you speak to countries, when you build up relations, when you strengthen the bonds of friendship, you put your country in a better standing to gain assistance and to advance the cause of development. So, in fact, the United Nations, one of the main purposes of the United Nations is to foster better relations, friendly relations among all countries. So by doing such, we are actually fulfilling our mandate in the international community. We are being a responsible state.
Good. How is this day actually celebrated? Are there activities or events throughout the 100 close to 200 countries that are members of the body? Are there any special or particular events that are held globally?
Well, different countries have different levels of observance. You find that in countries where there's a UN office, for example, Barbados and New York, Kenya, wherever there are UN centers, you find that there is more focus. Because the UN, they are seeing the UN here. As we see the central bank in St. Kitts and Nevis, they are seeing the UN. There is an actual office, so people actually focus more on the work of the UN. It's not mandatory. The General Assembly in 1971, they made a decision that member states should actually keep a holiday. But you know, this involves consultations among all parts of the society. So we in St. Kitts and Nevis, we don't keep that holiday, but we, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we think it's important to focus on the work of the United Nations and to show the work of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in that regard. So I am not sure if in the future we might hold other symposia or other events. That depends on the leadership at the ministry, but this is a start, and so we hope to really shed light on the work of the United Nations through this interview.
Okay, great. So let's talk a bit about the United Nations. Just about some of the things that this august body does that makes their work so important for all of us, really.
Yeah. Well, first I would like to focus on the main purposes. The main purpose of the United Nations. You will remember that the United Nations came out at the end of World War II.
Yes.
So it came out of the ashes of World War II. And the leaders at the time felt like we will never have another World War like this again. You know, so World War II was really impactful and it was transformational. So since World War II, we have never had a war on that scale. We have had the Korean War, we have had the Vietnam War, we have had Desert Storm, but we have never had a world war, you know. So the United Nations has been successful in averting another world war. People always talk about World War III coming and World War IV, but I don't think in my lifetime we will ever see that, because the United Nations promotes peace and dialogue among men. At the United Nations, you find a lot of meetings take place. There's the Security Council, which seeks to ensure peace and security among nations. There are 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. Okay, so we can go into that later, but there's the infrastructure, the architecture to avert war in place. The United Nations, as I mentioned earlier, is also important in the sense that it leads to promoting respect and understanding. No matter how countries fight among themselves, when they're on the United Nations floor, you are expected to be civil. Whether it's the Arab-Israeli conflict, whether it's Cuba or the US, there is a code that diplomats abide by. You don't insult, you are civil. Even though you use strong diplomatic language, you still are civil. You know, so this teaches us, the general public, a moral lesson. You know, we are to be civil with each other. We are not to be casting aspersions against the dignity of other persons. So it's important in that regard as well. The United Nations also promotes cooperation and solving all of the economic, social, cultural, environmental, and political problems. There is, when you look at the United Nations, there are agencies that represent every single aspect of people's lives. There's the political, there's the environmental. You know, you've heard of UNESCO.
Yes.
You've heard of UNDP. You've heard of UNICEF. You've heard of We and Women. Every single aspect, culture, be it arts and culture, be it sports, be it economics, be it science, humanitarians, refugees, all of these. It's a gigantic organization. It's global in scope, and so the UN bears relevance to the lives of our people. At the border level, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which follow from the Millennium Development Goals in 2000. So in 2015, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals, which again touch the lives of each person in the community. Whether or not you know it, you're being touched by the UN. So that is part of our focus of the program today. And I hope to demystify all of the areas which people think, you know, are just pie in the sky. But I'm willing to show you how they actually touch the lives of all in the community.
Okay, great. And of course, well, I heard in my research, I found out that yourself was a representative for us here at the United Nations. Now, just as late as last month, our Prime Minister, Dr. Timothy Harris, he returned to St. Kitts from after his participation in the annual United Nations General Assembly. Tell us a bit about this assembly. What's this aim? From my understanding, it brings all the world leaders together to hash out, to discuss and talk about global matters of significance. So can you just shed some light on this important meeting for us?
Yes, I'll be happy to shed some light in that regard. The United Nations General Assembly, it's the supreme body of the UN. It takes place once per year, and it runs for several months. But the general debate section, where all the world leaders come together, is a monumental achievement. You find that each member state, each member of the UN, they are given an opportunity to speak, to address the General Assembly and speak on issues which are important to them. So for us, you find that climate change is one which is very important to us.
Yes.
It is what we call an existential problem for us. Because if we have sea level rise and global warming to the point where it makes life difficult for us, we have problems on our hands. If for example the sea level rises, we have coastal communities which will have to be relocated. So there are cost implications for that. So government has to tangle its mind around that, and we have to contribute to the discussion and the actions taken at the global level to avert global warming and to mitigate and to adapt to the changes. So there's a lot of work being done in climate change, and we are definitely engaged at that level. That's one issue which we speak about. We speak about vulnerability to natural disasters, because sometimes bigger countries don't appreciate the concept of vulnerability.
It's true.
And one hurricane can set us back 10 years. It is true we are resilient, we bounce back really fast, but the damage and the impact on our economies, it drives us further into debt. We have to borrow money to recover from the hurricanes. And we're talking about 6 months every year. That's our reality.
Yes.
So a lot of countries don't appreciate that. Even though they might have a tornado, you might have a flood, but you can bounce back from that right away. A small country does not have that liberty. You know, so we try to focus a lot on vulnerability and the need for us to rely less on GDP. Because they say, oh, you are a rich country, you have a high GDP per capita. But that GDP can be eroded overnight. In 3 hours, you can just wipe out our GDP. One natural disaster.
As we have seen in the case of Bahamas recently, and Dominica a few years ago.
Grenada.
Yes.
Even us, even our experience with successive hurricanes, George and all of the other hurricanes we had in the late 90s. We were forced to go to the IMF and World Bank to borrow money to recover from those disasters. You know, so it's an issue for us, and it continues to be an issue for us. We will always be small.
True.
We can't increase our size, even if we were to dredge and fill the land with. We still have to face the seas, the ice seas, and the hurricanes every year. So that is a perennial problem for us. We also get a chance to speak in favor of our political allies. Our most long-standing and meaningful ally is the Republic of China and Taiwan. And if you know your history, you will know that the United Nations does not recognize Taiwan as a member. I think initially they were a member, but with geopolitical changes in that area, China, the Republic of China, People's Republic of China, became the member, and Taiwan was disbanded from the United Nations. So, as a responsible ally, we often call for the inclusion of Taiwan in the discussions at the United Nations level. This for us is an important issue, no matter which government is in power. While they remain an ally of ours, it remains an issue, and Taiwan values this kind of engagement, this kind of exposure. It's worth more to them than money. You know, so I mean, it's something which we often collaborate. All of the allies in the Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you find is another ally. You know, St. Lucia and Haiti and a few other allies in the Caribbean who still recognize Taiwan. and we often collaborate and sensitize the importance of Taiwan, of the United Nations recognizing Taiwan as a global partner. When there was the SARS epidemic, SARS didn't respect any borders, any boundaries.
Exactly.
It didn't want to know, am I in China, or am I in Taiwan, or am I in Hong Kong? You need to collaborate. So you find that there is need for countries to speak and develop protocols in dealing with problems like SARS, Ebola, and all of these diseases which threaten the existence of our peoples. So if there is a bird flu incident in Taiwan, China can't say, we're not speaking to you. So we want to promote dialogue. Even if it's on the political level, the United Nations seems to foster dialogue. One or two other issues we speak about: technical assistance for our countries. Yeah, because we actually need, because of our size and because our people keep migrating, we need to retrain and retool our people. So you find that when we speak to nations, we often request technical assistance to build our capacity, so our country can be a responsible player in the global arena. So that's very important for us as well. So the United Nations General Assembly is important in that regard. That's one aspect of it. Now there are a plethora of other meetings that take place, because you find that 193 countries are present. You find that there are other meetings, you have receptions, you have forums, you have other debates and focus groups, you know, because it provides the atmosphere for you to have a lot of dialogue. So you find that there are meetings at the Foreign Affairs Ministry level, there are meetings at the Prime Ministerial level or the head of government level, meetings at the head of state level. You know, so it's a very, very, very signal event, and we look forward to it every year. It involves a lot of work, a lot of logistics. You know, all of those heads of government being in town, it's a nightmare in terms of logistics. The Secret Service has to be working overtime in order to protect those heads of government and state. So it's a very interesting time.
I know one of the meetings, on the margins meeting, I constantly hear about a meeting of the Security Council. I know you said the UN is a global force for peace. So is at that meeting, this is one of the meetings where they discuss areas in which they can maintain this peace. I know, for instance, in our hemisphere, there has been the issue in Venezuela. I know that is continuing the tensions between two sides. So is this Security Council where these matters of security and other issues that threaten peace are discussed?
You are correct. Your observation and your research is correct. Actually, at the United Nations Security Council, they deal with conflict, averting conflicts. So let's say there's a breakdown, a civil war breakdown, the UN will dispatch troops right there, and then to try, diplomats, or we call them special envoys, to find out what the problem is and to work with all the parties, because opposition might not be speaking to the government. So the UN representative would speak to the government and the opposition, as well as civil society, as a means of trying to avert the problems. The UN also has peacekeeping forces, and there are special missions in countries where there are conflict or unrest. In our own Caribbean, there is one in Haiti. It's called MINUSTA, and that one is in Haiti. And you find that there's quite a number of peacekeeping forces in Africa, and some in Asia as well, and in Palestine. You know, so you find that there is a strong willingness among the UN members to promote peace. St. Vincent and the Grenadines recently was successful in a bid to join the Security Council. We celebrate that. They're a small country. It's quite a feat for them, quite an achievement, and we look forward to their presence on the Security Council. advancing our causes, because they're a small country just like us. They understand our issues, so they can clearly articulate them at that level.
Great. Good. And we are speaking about the United Nations. It's all about engagement, foreign engagement. St. Kitts and Nevis in particular, we have our own diplomatic relations. I understand we have this type of relations with 97 countries worldwide. Why is it important for us, a small country like St. Kitts and Nevis, limited resources, to establish such networks, relationships regionally and even further afield?
Yeah, it's very important. On the face of it, it's important for our dignity and our sovereignty. You know, we in the United Nations, every single member has one vote. So we are equal in that regard. As powerful as the United States of America is, you find that they only have one vote. Japan, they only have one vote.
That's because they are.
Yeah, they may have geopolitical power, you know, in the grander scheme of things. But when it comes to the dignity and the universality of the United Nations, it's one country, one vote. So we stand tall in that regard. We also have our mission, our permanent mission to the United Nations, which is located in New York City, and that mission deals with it sort of is a clearinghouse, a liaison office, and there's the ambassador or the permanent representative. That's Ambassador Sam Condor. He actually is our delegate, our permanent representative to the United Nations. There are a few other delegates as well supporting that office, and many countries don't have embassies in all over the world, so they use the United Nations as a conduit to engaging other countries. So you find that it's very important in that regard. Now, as I hinted earlier, our involvement in the United Nations relates to advancing the cause of development. So anything to do with development, we are interested in it. Whether it's fisheries, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industry, whether it's any dimension of the sustainable development spectrum. So you find that we have to always be on guard and always look out for opportunities for engagement in order to steer development, leverage development to our country. If we sit down, we won't get anything.
True.
We have to be active. We have to look out for these opportunities and assert ourselves. In spite of our small size, we have to assert ourselves.
Okay, you are tuned into Working For You, and of course this is an interactive program. You are always welcome to join the show by calling our numbers at 465-2555. That's the local number, and for those internationally, you can contact us by calling 718-577-2916. Of course, your thoughts, your comments are always welcome, a part of the show. We are talking about United Nations, the importance of this august body to global peace and security for all of us. And let's continue the discussion a bit. We hear a lot about visa-free access to countries, St. Kitts and Nevis and many other territories. What's the significance of having visa-free access apart from the simple aspect of being able to enter a country? Is there any deeper benefit to these visa-free access that countries seek between each other?
Yeah, visa-free access is a very important pillar of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs policy or border policy. Our mission, in essence, is to increase the number of countries with which which our nationals have visa-free terms. It promotes movement of people. It also promotes investment opportunities. If, for example, you have to wait for 10 or 20 days to get a visa, it actually slows you down, and it actually serves as a barrier to free movement. So we are actually actively pursuing this policy. Right now we have over 150 countries. I remember I told you there were like 193 countries in the United Nations.
Yes.
all countries are not part of the UN, so there are about 204, 205 countries.
Yes.
But we find that to have visa-free access to 150 countries is quite an achievement.
Yes.
And this is a policy which started years ago, and it was continued by the current administration. It makes a lot of sense. And you feel a sense of pride knowing that you can go to several countries for short stay. Most of them are short stay for up to 90 days without obtaining a visa. You know, it adds to the dignity of being a national of St. Kitts and Nevis, compared to other countries where they have to get a visa to go everywhere.
True.
It actually takes away from your pride. It hurts your sense of pride as a country. So it's definitely a policy which I can foresee being sustained. And the main purpose, as I indicated, are for tourism purposes, investment. You know, we have the Citizenship by Investment program, and that has contributed significantly to our development over the past 10 to 15 years. And it allows us to market ourselves. It improves our appeal whenever we increase the number of countries with which we have visa-free access. So that's one of the practical purposes of it, but that's not the only one. I mean, some people laugh and say, well, we don't go to Estonia. Nobody here going to Estonia. But you don't know if an Olympic game is going to be held there. And you don't know if a football tournament is going to be held there. And then all of a sudden you're scrambling trying to get visas out of Washington. Well, the work has already been done for you by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you know, using our missions. So we really need to be practical and sensible about the news and developments. Some people say, why do we want to establish relations with a country in Africa? Nobody does go there. Remember, we have citizens all over the world.
That's true.
You know, we can't just think of our citizenship in terms of within our jurisdiction borders. So we have to be quite sensible about that and appreciate the value of that policy.
And of course, there are many of these territories offer scholarship opportunities for us even here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I'm sure that this cordial relations that we establish comes into play with that. We always ask for assistance, scholarships. Sometimes it's countries like Morocco where we don't have a tradition of uptake, but we often encourage people to go to these countries because you learn a language, number one. So there's the added value of learning a foreign language, but you also get to appreciate the culture of those countries. And it takes a lot of hard work and persistence in trying to negotiate these agreements. So I would like to encourage people our residents to follow up and take advantage of the opportunities available in terms of scholarships and short-term training programs. Great. That's a very important note there. And I understand we have several honorary consuls, ambassadors, resident, and as well as based overseas. Now, what are the importance of having these individuals placed in these different territories?
Let's start with the ambassadors. Ambassadors are normally resident at our embassies or high commissions. Whenever we are speaking about the Commonwealth of Nations, we have a high commission for the members, among the members. They are basically embassies, but they call them high commissions. So we have our ambassadors and high commissions placed at strategic points. Washington DC for the US, London for the UK and the Commonwealth of Nations. We have a presence as well in Canada, in Toronto. We have a presence in Brussels in conjunction with the OECS. So it's a joint embassy. We also have a presence in Morocco. And that's the most recent addition to our list of embassies. And Ambassador Ian Quealy, former Commissioner of Police, is the head of mission there. And These placements are very strategic. It costs a significant amount of money to run a mission, a foreign mission, staffing and other associated costs. And we have to be strategic, and we have to be selective in our engagement. We also have to always be mindful of the need to leverage aid to our country. So we have to use our missions to bring development to our country. Sometimes people say, I don't know what they're doing out there, but the truth is, there is a ripe field for engagement. Just imagine 193 countries at the UN. In London, you have 77 or 78 countries to engage at the level of the Commonwealth. African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, you know. So it makes a lot of sense to continually engage. You can't just say you're doing it this week and then next week you take a break. You have to keep the engagement, keep the active engagement. I forgot to mention we also have a consulate in Dubai, which
Yes.
looks after, in large measure, the Citizenship and Investment Program. You know, it markets the country in that regard. We have a consul general at that location. It's very important for us. So we find that it's important for us to continually engage. It's also important for our nationals. When you go to a country, you feel good when you know that there is a mission or an embassy there. The embassy is duty bound by the Vienna Convention to look after the interests of the nationals.
Okay.
Government is paying.
So nationals in that particular country, they can visit
Yes.
these places.
Yes.
And,
Yes, yes. In fact, if they are in trouble, if they get in trouble with the law, if they fall in hardship, you know, they're expected, the ambassador is expected to go and look for them in the prison. Not to get them out of the prison, you know, because due process has to take its course,
yes.
but to actually ensure that they are being treated humanely, to see what they can do to ensure that their dignity and self-worth and the pride of the nation is enhanced and maintained.
Okay. I didn't know that
Yeah.
to begin with. Okay, so let's go back about the United Nations. You mentioned their work in advocacy for peace. What are some of the stuff they do in terms of promotion of health matters and women's rights? I know these are two global matters that demand a lot of attention. What are some of the work they do in these particular areas?
Well, there is sufficient documentary evidence to show that the United Nations is very active in those two sectors that you mentioned, health and women's rights, gender affairs. In fact, the Sustainable Development Goals recognizes this, and you find that women, it calls for mainstreaming of women or gender parity. So you find that if men and women do the same work, they should receive the same pay. This is not the same in all countries. You know, men will do the exact identical work, and the man will get more money than the woman. I don't want to call any countries names, but it happens in a lot of countries still. We cannot say that it happens in St. Kitts and Nevis, because women have made quite a number of advancements in the development of our country. There is still some way to go in terms of being at the top of the political spectrum. We have never had a female prime minister or governor general, you know, in that regard. So we can see where that is going. However, most of our permanent secretaries are women. Most of our heads department are women, and women are at the very top of our police and military, and you know, you find that women, we don't have that issue as some other countries. For cultural purposes, women can't drive, women can't vote. That still exists in some countries. So the United Nations, through the organ UN Women, the regional offices in Barbados and Jamaica, we find that they advance the work. They work with the ministries of Gender Affairs, and there are programs in place to uplift women. You know, so you find that those programs are actually taking place in St. Kitts and Nevis right now and throughout the entire Caribbean. The United Nations supplies vaccines to 45% of the world's children.
Wow.
You know, and they help save 3 million lives a year. A lot of countries don't have the wherewithal to purchase vaccines. So you find the UN fills the gap in this respect. There's also the World Health Program, the World Health Assembly, where the ministers of health meet on an annual basis, and they tackle problems or issues dealing with health. We have NCDs, non-communicable diseases. That is a big problem for the Caribbean and a lot of the developing world, where you find chronic diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, kidney disease, cancer. These are challenges which we face, and they actually affect our productivity. The number of amputations, you know, it's a serious health challenge, and the United Nations tackle this. The NCDs. In fact, NCDs are captured in the Sustainable Development Goals, fighting NCDs. And St. Kitts and Nevis is responsible for health matters in CARICOM,
yes,
as you're aware. So we have a significant amount of experience in engaging at that level. So the UN is also important in that regard. So that's just one area. I can mention others, but I mean, I just wanted to give a snapshot of the vaccines program, the NCD program, and the work with women.
I know one of the things that many hear about the work of the UN is the humanitarian aid. The humanitarian aid, their assistance, particularly in terms of storms and other natural disasters. Can you speak to this a bit? I mean, why are they always one of the first to respond to the needs of others when these natural occurrences and sometimes man-made occurrences take place?
Well, the UN also looks at disaster risk reduction and mitigation of natural disasters and response to natural disasters as well. And there's a great body of evidence showing the UN responding to issues, to occurrences such as these. When there's a tsunami, the UN is the first on the ground. In fact, whatever meeting is being held, they normally stop and acknowledge the passing of the natural disaster, and they often mobilize assistance to assist the country that is affected. So we find that that's one of the main pillars of response at that level. There was this tsunami, you recall the tsunami 15 years ago in Thailand and in Asia, in that area, and the one in Japan as well. You know, our own experience with Hurricane Maria. The Secretary General went to Dominica actually,
yes,
to observe the work and to make recommendations for an appropriate response. So we find that even though it's a global institution, there is often a reflection of a response which actually affects the local at the domestic level. So that again is one area which I would like to focus on: disaster risk reduction. There is the Sendai framework in Japan. There was a whole UN conference on disaster risk reduction. Japan is the major sponsor of that body of work, and it falls under the rubric of the United Nations.
Okay, there are always countless. We hear of them, these bodies, these conferences. What about the follow-up? How good is the UN at following up on these conferences, the pledges that are made to different world nations? In your opinion?
In my opinion, in my humble opinion. Well, following up is always a challenge because it involves all of these countries. For example, let's use the SIDS conference in 2013 in Samoa, Small Island Developing States. This conference was a global conference. It was held in Samoa, in Apia, in 2013. And it was a major conference. You find that there was this Samoa pathway which follows up to the Barbados Plan of Action in terms of protecting the environment and ensuring sustainable development. And the United Nations is mindful of the importance of following up. So you find that the Samoa pathway, in essence, is a response to the Barbados Plan of Action and the Rio Accord back in 1994. So you find that we will have these meetings being held in 10-year intervals, and there's a work program. There are action matrices which requires member states to follow up according to the actions. For example, St. Kitts and Nevis, we are responsible for building partnerships with others in order to ensure sustainable development. That is why we have such good relations with Taiwan, because they help us to achieve our sustainable development goals. We also have to engage at all levels. Civil society, governance involves civil society engagement. It's not just government, but it involves private sector, civil society, the churches, all civic organizations, academic institutions. You know, so all of these are part and parcel of the follow-up action. If you leave it up to the member states, nothing will be done.
Exactly.
Because we have a lot of other issues to deal with. But with the United Nations playing a lead role in coordinating the response, I am more confident that we will be able to achieve our goals. We have up until 2030 in order to achieve the sustainable development goals.
Now, 193 members. That's a lot of countries for membership in terms of one body. What if one nation decides to act out in some way or form that threatens the peace, the stability of a region in particular? Does the United Nations has the authority to impose any type of sanctions or punishment, for lack of a better word, on this nation to basically help bring them back in line along the path with everyone else?
Definitely, the provision for sanctions rests within the ambit of the Security Council. However, there must be consensus in that regard. You're familiar that there's a power of the veto. So one country, one of the 5 permanent members of the UN, they can veto an action. So you find traditionally, if it's a left-leaning country, you find that China and Russia will balance the power of US, UK, and France. You know, so you find that if it's the reverse, you find the UN, the US, Britain, or France will veto. You know, so it's a balance of power, yes, and they check each other's power. What I can say definitively is that there have been cases where you have consensus and unanimity. For example, in cases of genocide, you find that persons have to be accountable for killing mass numbers of people. You find that there is consensus, and these cases go to the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. So what I can say definitively, it's a mixed experience because of geopolitical dynamics. You find left-leaning countries would vote a certain way, and the so-called right-leaning countries will vote a certain way. So they check each other in terms of their power.
Which is good. You mentioned a bit of you spoke a bit of the membership in terms of permanent members. Can you basically explain what that means for those who might not know?
Well, the Security Council comprises of 15 members. You have 5 permanent members, and there are 10 non-permanent members. And the 5 permanent members are the US, UK, France, Russia, and China. And these are the countries who actually won after World War II. They came out victorious. So you find Japan and Germany and those countries, they had no place. You are in no position to rebuild the world. Exactly. You know, so you find that they were left out in the cold. They have on many occasions been a part of the Security Council, but as a non-permanent member. Now there have been calls, numerous calls for Security Council reform under the wider rubric of reform in the United Nations. And unfortunately, the discussions have not made much progress. Generally, the membership believes that you need to expand the Security Council. You need to, because the situation in the world, as it was in 1945, is totally different to as it is now. No. France doesn't have near the amount of power that they had at the end of World War II. But France will never give up its permanent seat. China will never give up its permanent seat in the United Nations. You know, so I mean, you have a case where it's a constant struggle to get things done. There are several proposals, I mean, we can check the literature. There are several proposals for you to have 10 permanent members, okay, to expand it up to 10 members. Some call for it to have an additional member from each geographical region of the world, right? And Brazil and Japan and Germany want to be permanent members, and South Africa, they are saying that one country from Africa should be a permanent member. You know what? But you find that it's a constant struggle. Every time you work, you make 2 steps forward, you make 1 step back because somebody pull it back. Yeah. And there has to be consensus in order for the work program to go forward. But what I'm encouraged by is the sustainability of the project. The project's advancing. And I always say, once countries continue to dialogue, there is scope for progress. There is room for progress. When you stop talking, there's nothing you can do. So I take comfort in the fact that the work program and UN reform continues.
But you mentioned at the end of the day, they all get 1 vote. So the permanent members, do they have some other influence or something that why there's been such a call for the
reform, for the reform? Of course, they have significant leverage. Being on the Security Council is a big issue. There's the UN regular work program, and then there's the work of the Security Council. That's a totally different kettle of fish. You know, it's a totally different sphere of influence. St. Vincent will now have exposure in ways it never had in its 50 years of independence. You know, it's tremendous. You find that a lot of agencies will approach them seeking support, seeking for them to vote a certain way. They can use that access to leverage development for their country. That is something which we should all aim for, having a level of access that can further our development. They might be exposed to industries. The defense industry is a major industry. They might be exposed to a lot of training for their diplomats and their people. Just the access, just the exposure from being on the Security Council is tremendous. And you find that countries really try hard to get on the Security Council. And it takes a vote. Now, every country has 1 vote, but in the Security Council, because of its special status, not every country can vote in a resolution by the Security Council. Only 15 members. You know, so that again is something which is peculiar.
So is the non-membership, the non-permanent membership, is that rotated? Is that
yes.
annual thing or
no? Every 4 years.
Okay.
Every 4 years, but I mean, you serve for 2 years, but the elections take place every year, but for different members.
Okay.
So you have continuity because it's staggered. So you will be on it for 2 years, and next year there will be an election, but you wouldn't be up for election, but somebody else. It rotates, and there are groups in the UN. For example, there's the Latin America and the Caribbean. There's the Western European countries group. There's the Eastern European countries group. There's the African group. So you would have to vote for one country from that geographical region. So you find that we often rotate and in terms of our aspirations for candidatures.
From your knowledge of things and even
we have never put forward a candidature. In fact, this is the first time St. Vincent and the Grenadines has put forward a candidature and they were successful. Now timing is important there because in Latin America and the Caribbean there are 33 countries. Okay? 33 countries. So we have, if St. Vincent and the Grenadines is there now, next time we can't reasonably get a chance to be in there because we just had a small country. You have to wait your turn. So you have to be more strategic and say, okay, 5 years down the road, I'm going to put forward my candidacy. And you start to whisper certain things in person's ear, let them know St. Kitts and Nevis is interested, and then at the right time, you put out your announcement. So diplomacy is a constant engagement exercise. You have to continuously engage. You can't just be absent and then want to be on the Security Council. You have to be there, let people know you're present, and you actually make your bid from there.
Good. Hopefully we can be strategic, and hopefully we can make a bid one of these times.
That is definitely an accomplishment which we should celebrate.
Great.
We should look towards. It's aspirational.
I've seen and I've heard of instances where influential or impacted individuals in particular have used the United Nations to address or draw attention to a particular issue in a particular country. Is this something that the UN practices regularly, Anna? And is this something that they see as a means to open up the door for greater discussion in terms of garnering attention and basically action on whatever agenda that person has brought up?
Your observation is quite astute. Yeah, you're correct. Let's go back to the Security Council. Up to 5 or 10 years ago, the Security Council never considered anything with climate change. They would say, oh, that's the work of United Nations Environment Program. That's the work of some other organ. Let's keep it out of the Security Council. But when we as small states were able to show them, hey, you could have conflicts resulting from natural disasters. People can start looting, fighting, and civil warfare can actually arise out of a natural disaster. So climate change could result in political and social unrest. And what is the United Nations Security Council mandate? What is their mandate? To promote peace and security. So all we have to do as small states is to show and to demonstrate in a very meaningful way how natural disasters can actually affect peace and security. And now we find that the Security Council regularly considers questions of climate change and environmental matters. But in its pure sense, UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, UNFCCC, Framework on Climate Change, they deal with these matters. But when it comes to the link, the nexus between peace and security and natural disasters, the Security Council, it falls squarely within the remit of the United Nations Security Council. Also, the exact experience with non-communicable diseases CARICOM has played a very, very important role in bringing this issue to the fore. And you know who represents this issue in CARICOM? St. Kitts and Nevis. So I'm very proud whenever we hear of actions taken in relation to NCDs and those HIV/AIDS and those other scourges. St. Kitts and Nevis has traditionally and continues to play a role in advancing those work programs. So you find that it's very important for us as small states to be engaged in that regard. So to answer your questions in a nutshell, the answer is yes.
Okay, great.
We can bring issues to the forefront.
You rightfully mentioned CARICOM. From your experience, have the CARICOM taken more of a united approach, or is it an individual approach when it comes to matters at the United Nations level? Do we, let's say NCDs, do we take a regional approach to call for global attention to this, or it's St. Kitts speak from their experience and we have Antigua touching their own? Is it a regional effort?
Yeah, it is largely a regional effort. There's a CARICOM caucus of ambassadors, okay? And we find the situation where the caucus of ambassadors has a chairman. The chairmanship rotates every 2 months, okay? And every single CARICOM member state at the UN, with a mission at the UN, gets an opportunity to chair. So they coordinate the actions. The ambassadors meet regularly. They meet at the ambassador level and they meet at the experts level. And the UN agenda is discussed at those meetings. Our response is discussed at those meetings. In fact, the modality is a statement is prepared, a draft statement, and it is circulated to all the members. They look at the statement and they make sure that it is something that represents their country. And then the statement will be read at the meeting. So there's a protocol for that kind of action, and it works very well. With the Sustainable Development Goals, it worked really well. With political issues, you have a much different experience. With issues relating to women's rights and sexual and reproductive rights, women issues, it's also less cohesive because you have some conservative countries, member states, you have some more radical member states. So you find that, for example, in Guyana, a young girl can get married earlier than in other member states. Okay, because of the Indian influence.
Yes.
You find also that there are some more conservative positions in in countries where the Catholic Church has a strong presence, like St. Lucia. They would still be against abortion, sexual and reproductive rights. All of these things fall under the ambit of the UN. Right? And the most important one, which I can call to bear, is Venezuela. CARICOM was split down in the middle in terms of the response. In some cases, you have a cohesive action, but in other cases, split down in the middle. In CARICOM, we have some countries part of ALBA, yes, which is the Bolivarian alternative to the OAS, and some countries are not. Some countries are in the Lima group, which is terribly against the Venezuela regime, the current regime in Venezuela. So there is no unanimity in the question of Venezuela. One can argue that there is less unanimity in that area. And statements, I can recall the statement that we prepared at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in February. That took about 7 hours to prepare because everybody was going over every single letter, every dot, every comma, every word had to be carefully negotiated. And that was done in caucus because of the sensitivity of the issue. So we find a situation where issues of political significance, which have political implications for the member states, there's often a reluctance to having a unified approach, even though that's the aspiration. We all want to have a unanimous position, but that is not always the case.
What about the UN's work with the future generation, the young people? How are young people engaged, or can be engaged at the United Nations level? Is there a voice that they can have there besides from their leaders, the leaders of the world? Do they have is there any platform that allows young people to go and address things that might be of concern to them?
Of course, there is. There's UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. One of the pillars on the UNESCO deals with the youth, education and youth, and science and technology, and culture. Youth, there is space for youth to engage at all of those levels. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we have the UNESCO Secretariat. Mrs. Dorothy Warner is the Secretary General of that organization. So programs are channeled through her office, through the Ministry of Education, of course, which is responsible for youth at the national level. And I would encourage all the youth to go and speak with Mrs. Warner and see how they can best find a platform for them to operate. There's also the Global Environmental Fund facility, Miss Eilis Watts. There's an office on West Independence Square Street, which encourages young people to have projects, community projects aimed towards environmental objectives, conservation of the environment, and I would certainly encourage the young people to also engage at that level. So those are the two I can think of at the spur of the moment.
Okay. In terms of the outreach of the UN, do you think much is being done at the local levels in terms of in member states to educate the population in terms of the work of this important body? Because I'm pretty sure there are quite a few people who may still not know of what this body really represents, what it stands for.
There's always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement, and I think part of this exercise is to chip that iceberg.
Yes.
You know, to chip the iceberg in terms of making people more aware of the work of the UN. What I can say definitively at the moment is that there is a Office of the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS. That person is Mr. Didier Trebuk, and he was in St. Kitts as recently as last week.
Okay.
You know, and he met with stakeholders in government and the private sector. They spoke of the different work programs. There is a whole body of work being done on the blue economy. The blue economy refers to the ocean and all of the resources that can be extracted from it. So there can be marine resources, which is fish, seafood, and there can also be power. You know, you can get generate power from operating turbines in a sustainable way, of course. And there is work program also on desalination, because there is not enough water in the earth to feed all of the people in the earth. So we have to use the oceans. The oceans is a vast resource in terms of water, but the water has to be transformed in order to make it potable. So we talk about water management on the UNDP. We talk about wastewater management. Last week we had a conference on water and wastewater, which dealt largely with those questions. For example, the Park Hyatt, they use their water from the sea. There's a desalination plant, and the water that they use in the hotel, even in the taps, those come from the sea. But if you drink the water, you will not know it came from the sea. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, they have a wastewater treatment. So all of the water that comes from washing dishes and toilets and all of that water is treated and is used to water the gardens, water the lawns. That is where we need to go. Instead of using the water which is treated at great expense to wash your car.
Exactly.
You know, we should have a system in place where the water is treated for watering the lawns, the golf courses, and all of the gardens, and all of the agricultural purposes that we have. We should be able to have solutions for those needs. So the UN is doing work in that regard as well, in water management and wastewater management. Then there's the human rights empowerment, gender and social affairs. Just because somebody is a refugee doesn't mean that they are criminal. We have to treat them humanely. For example, if you find we find that some refugees end up on our shores, we should not put them on the bench as common criminals. Some of them could be victims of human trafficking. So we have to find a way of dealing with those. The UN also deals with these. There's a whole convention on refugees and how you treat refugees.
Okay.
So that again falls under the work of the United Nations.
And we as in saying we are signatories to
these conventions. Okay. Yes. So we are treaty bound. We have obligations in terms of how we meet treatment out to persons who are illegal, because you have to first determine if they are criminals or if they are victims. In a lot of cases, they are victims.
Great. So you just mentioned those are some of the works of the UNDP. Is it a matter of the UNDP brings these different types of projects, or do we, as in the member states, do we formulate these ideas and we pitch them to the UNDP for action?
It works both ways. There's a bottom-up approach, and there's also a top-down approach. So it works both ways. They normally consult with us. What are your needs? What are your needs? For example, if we have a security situation, we will say, okay, we need interventions in social programs to assist persons with single parents. You know, you need engagement or programs at the community level, so persons can learn a skill instead of being on the street. They can actually learn a skill. You have programs for parents, for single parents. You have a lot of programs which help, but we need to indicate our interests, and then they respond to that. No, the UN is also a forum provides a forum for people to exchange ideas. So if we have a successful program, we can share our experience with other countries who may have a similar situation to us.
And that has been done over the years?
Yes, over the years. Yes.
Okay. So great. You have shared so much information about what the UN does and continues to do for the entire world. So basically, for the St. Nevis men and women out here, what would be your comment to them when they ask, is the United Nations important relevant for St. Kitts and Nevis as a small island developing state?
I will answer in the affirmative, emphatically so. You know, it's just a matter of demystifying and breaking it down, because sometimes we as technocrats, we speak with a lot of jargon, a lot of terminologies which mom and pop don't understand. When you're at the UN, you have a lot of lofty languages, you know, and you have to sit down and listen to statements for hours, and people get the impression that nothing is being done. But at the practical level, a lot is being done. We just don't see it. It just doesn't come with the name UN on package as a UN program.
Okay.
But as I mentioned earlier, every single ministry is tied to the UN. Every single ministry you could think of, whether it's education, health, agriculture. There's the FAO, you know, the Food and Agriculture Organization. That is a UN.
That's under the umbrella.
That's a UN body as well. So you see, people don't really see it in those terms, but it's like a world government, a world governance body. FAO, UNESCO, science, even the Olympics. You know, even though they fall under the IOC, they are links to the UN. You know, so we just have to show the linkages and how they are practically demonstrated and reflected in the lives of the ordinary man and woman on the street.
Great. You've heard it from the mouth of our guest for today, Senior Foreign Service Officer Samuel Berridge. So when you see him, you can ask him for a lot more information. I will of course give you the final word. Is there anything you would like to add before we conclude today's program?
Well, I would just like to underscore the importance of persons making themselves available and obtaining information. Everybody uses the World Wide Web now. You can just Google, you can look at un.org, and any question you have, you can actually do a search. Everybody has data on their phones. You know, you need to make yourself much more informed. There are scholarships. There's the United Nations University in Japan, you know, which actually gives scholarships. People need to actually make themselves more informed. And part of my remit here this afternoon is to demystify the United Nations and make it easily accessible, more easily accessible to people, to the regular man and woman on the street. Even though I don't like to use that word, regular man and woman on the street, because we are all regular.
Of course.
But to the persons who are not involved in policy making and government.
Mr. Berridge, I want to thank you very much for your time and of course all this information you have brought to us and to the listening public out there. And just to remind everyone that Thursday, October 24th is celebrated globally as United Nations Day. I want to thank you everyone for tuning in and for listening to us for another edition of Working For You. Again, I thank Mr. Berridge, today's guest, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Working For You. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Lesroy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working For You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working For You.